everyone. This is a day in the life of a Linux user. My audio blog, November 26, 2010, episode number 5. Okay, today I'd just like to talk a little bit about Xerox and their place in computer history. Now, a lot of people talk a lot about Microsoft and how Microsoft put a computer on every desk, so to speak. Okay, I'd like just to set the record straight on that and just let everybody know that Microsoft doesn't even make computers, so there's no way Microsoft can take credit for putting a computer on every desk. Not true. What Microsoft managed to do was control the OEMs, or the original equipment manufacturers. Now, this is a real sore point because obviously if you go to a computer store today or a Future Shop or a Best Buy, all you're going to see is Microsoft Windows computers, Microsoft Windows operating system preloaded onto netbooks, laptops, desktops, what have you. The only other choice is Macintosh, Apple Mac, and their operating system. Now, I don't think that's really too great of a choice. You've got two proprietary operating systems to choose from, and if you don't like either of them, you don't have the option of getting a blank computer or a computer without an operating system. This is especially true when you're talking about netbooks and laptops or notebooks, and that is a big problem. Now, if we go back in time to the 90s, B Corp offered free licenses to OEMs if they would preload BOS. But the wimpy OEMs didn't do that. They all caved into Microsoft. I think Toshiba might be the single exception. Although, I never saw a Toshiba come preloaded with BOS. But I hear that they did at one point. So good for Toshiba, but not so good for everybody else. In that nobody heard about it, like we never heard anything about it. I never heard anything about it, unfortunately. But even in that respect, if we look at that more closely, we'll see that BOS is itself a closed source operating system. So that would have only meant that we had 3 closed source operating systems. Actually, we had 4 because I forgot to mention Amiga DOS or Amiga OS, also closed source, also proprietary. So that would have been a 4th choice, and I'm sure if I think about it for longer, I could come up with another one. So anyway, all the wimpy OEMs caved into Microsoft and signed some Faustian agreement or contract with Microsoft. Now, okay, I want to talk about Xerox PARC, the research operation, and they basically invented the mouse, the Ethernet, and the bit-mapped graphical user interface. So a lot of the things that we associate now with personal computers, all invented by Xerox research. And starting in 1993, they had the Xerox Alto, and they produced several thousand units. I should mention that this isn't a commercial product, and basically what they did was they used it internally at Xerox, and they donated Altos to places like MIT, Stanford, CMU, and the University of Rochester. So they were lucky. They all got free Altos. It would have been an amazing thing to see in 1973, I'm sure. Then they came out with the Xerox Star in 1981, and later on the Xerox Daybreak in 1989. And After that, I don't see too much record about Xerox computers after 1989. They seem to disappear after that, as far as I can tell in my research. Okay, so we can see, just to sum up, we can see that Xerox invented a lot of things, and they really should get the credit for a lot of the concepts that we take for granted with computers now. So we'll leave it at that, and next thing I want to talk about is Flash as a control mechanism, Adobe Flash, which I consider as an impediment to computer users in a lot of ways. It is, once again, we have this closed source entity, and we have content providers that don't really want you to record their streams, so they're streaming video and audio on the internet, and it's really a pain in the butt if you want to try to record those streams, and obviously they don't really want you to be able to do that. YouTube is something of an exception to this. You can actually get a Python script called YouTube Download that will enable you to download videos off of YouTube. So I'll just mention one more thing about that. This is a general problem with closed source, that you can't really make a closed source program do what you want in some cases. Adobe Flash is a closed source program. It's closed source software. The only other thing I can add to that is the Midori MIDORI web browser had a bit better Flash performance than Firefox, but really, so what? I mean, it's not really something that is that desirable to computer users, at least in my opinion. Now, I will say that if you look at other operating systems like Haku and Plan 9 and AROS and OpenBSD, none of them have Adobe Flash on them. As far as I know, there's no way to get Adobe Flash on any of those operating systems that I just mentioned. So you can say that's good or bad depending on your point of view. I think it's basically good because you don't want your operating system to be cruded up with a bunch of closed source stuff. And I'm going to go into more detail about this. Just to illustrate this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about older Linux distros and their fall into disuse. And my earlier point about older computers not being well supported. I mean, obviously you can't stick Windows 7 on an old computer. Probably impossible. And by older computer, I'll define older computer as something with 256 megs of RAM or less, and Intel P3 or older. I'll consider that to be an older computer. What is the solution to this problem? Well, here's what I did. Basically, you can do your own support if you have all the source code for your operating system and device drivers. It's difficult and almost impossible to do if you don't have source code for things. Like if you don't have source code for a particular device driver, you're going to be in a position where you either have to write the driver yourself, or you're going to try to reverse engineer the driver. And that can be difficult. Actually, it can be difficult to even modify a device driver, even when you have the source code. It can be quite complex and difficult to understand. So there's definitely a learning process there. Now, so we can see that there's two things that make it difficult. There's the fact that there's no source code at all, or that it's so complex that it's difficult to understand. Now, I'll just talk about a specific example about a game written by Loki in 1997, Eric's Ultimate Solitaire. And actually, Loki games in general They don't work on newer Linux distros. And this is somewhat true of LGP programs, although they're still around and they're still doing updates, so it's not as big of a problem. For example, Majesty Gold was updated. It will function on newer Linux distros. That's Linux Game Publishing, and you can see them at linuxgamepublishing.com. They're still kicking and they're still doing great work, so definitely check those guys out. Now, if you are a programmer, you can recompile your own source code and ensure that it works on a newer operating system. Now, I just want to make the distinction. I see two different types of groups. I see weavers and I see programmers, and I don't mean to say weavers in a disparaging manner, really. I'm just going to say that the weaver is dependent on libraries, and they're not the type of person that's going to write everything by themselves. They're not going to write their own libraries. For example, they're just going to use, most people are just going to use, even if they are a programmer, they're just going to use the available libraries. Of course, there are some programmers that write their own libraries or improve older libraries. So the weaver can work faster than the programmer, and I'll say programmer in terms of programmer, someone who likes to program everything, right? He likes to write his own drivers, he likes to write his own device drivers, maybe even he likes to write his own operating system. Okay, the advantage of being a weaver over a straight programmer is that it's much faster, obviously. The downside is that you can encounter problems by how do we make all this stuff work together. Right now we have a newer library, now we have a newer operating system, now we have an older piece of software. Will it all work together? Oftentimes we will see that they will not work together, at least not 100%. The alternative idea is for people who are running older systems, they can just run old software with the old operating system. So everything old together. Old computer, old operating system, old games. No problem. They all work together because they're from the same era. And I'll just give a quick example of that. I did that myself with FreeDOS and the original Lands of Lore game from 1993, which I ran on a 46. FreeDOS itself is open source. There was one binary blob issue with that, and that was the sound card driver was binary only. I don't have the source code, for the sound card driver for that system. I think it was a Jazz 16 or a Jazz 16 compatible sound card. And of course, Lands of Lore itself is a binary only piece of software. I don't have the source code for that either. So if I wanted to modify it or make new characters, it would be difficult to do that. I'll briefly describe the 486. It is a IBM EduQuest Model 35, and I have a dual booting BL3, which is a very simple Linux distro running 2.2 kernel and FreeDOS. It's 17 years old and it still works. It has 16 megs of RAM. Has an Intel 486 SLC2 microprocessor running at 50 megahertz. Now, even though it's only running at 50 megahertz, and it's running FreeDOS, it's still faster to do it that way than to run it on a newer machine, like for example a P3 550 running a DOSBox emulator. And also I found that there were missing some sound effects, and the computer really can't do 320 by 200 mode properly. It cannot make the pixels a different aspect ratio. So at least it couldn't on the hardware that I have on the P3. So you can see that there's really no substitute. We can talk about emulators, and there's lots of them, but it's really never as good as the real thing. There's no substitute for the original. Anytime you try to emulate something, you can never emulate it perfectly. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about wireless keyboards.